my fellow Americans.
You might be wondering, why in the world is there a 30-minute countdown before the show starts? Well, we actually start live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time, so this whole 30-minute countdown is a chance for YouTube and Rumble to send out their alerts and notifications, so we encourage you to gather up and hang out with everyone in the chat room. So every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time is when we do this show live. You can join us for the countdown if you like, or just set your clock and reminder that at 4 p.m. Eastern is when we go live. You can also make sure you subscribe and turn on that bell notification, so hopefully you will get a notification.
What do you have to say about dictators of countries like Indonesia, who we sell weapons to, yet they are slaughtering people in East Timor? What do you have to say about Israel, who is slaughtering Palestinians, who impose martial law? What do you have to say about that? Those are our allies. Why do we sell weapons to these countries? Why do we support them? Why do we bomb Iraq when it commits similar problems?
There are various examples of things that are not right in this world, and the United States is trying. I really am surprised that people feel that it is necessary to defend the rights of Saddam Hussein, when what we ought to be thinking about is how to make sure that he does not use weapons of mass destruction.
I'd like to...
Who are shouting? Just a moment.
I'm not defending him in the least. What I am saying is that there needs to be consistent application of U.S. foreign policy. We cannot support people who are committing the same violations because they are political allies. That is not acceptable. We cannot violate UN resolutions when it is convenient to us. You're not answering my question, Madam Albright.
You briefed the press, did you not, when you were there?
Well, I had several jobs. One of my jobs was that of analyst. I also was an interrogator and indeed briefed the press when we, the CIA, wanted to circulate disinformation on a particular issue. Disinformation is not necessarily a lie. It may be a half-truth. And we would pick out a journalist. I would go do the briefing and hope that he would put the information in print.
What was your percentage of success?
We were pretty successful in planning information of a rather rarefied nature. For instance, if we wanted to get across to the American public that the North Vietnamese were building up their force structure in South Vietnam, I would go to a journalist and advise him that in the past 6 months, X number of North Vietnamese forces had come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail system through southern Laos. Now, there is no way a journalist can check that information. That's data derived from radio intercepts, spy in the sky photography. So either he goes with the information or he doesn't, and ordinarily or usually, the journalist would go with it because it looked like some kind of exclusive. Go after these gentlemen. I would be directed to cultivate them, to spend time with them at the Caravel Hotel or the Continental Hotel, to socialize with them, and slowly but surely to try to gain their confidence by dolloping out valid information which was true. And then I would drop into a conversation the data that we wanted to get across, which might not be true. One piece of data, for instance, that we managed to plant in the New Yorker magazine had to do with a supposed North Vietnamese effort in 1973 to develop airfields along the border of South Vietnam. The reason we wanted to plant this information was that we were trying to persuade the U.S. Congress that Saigon should continue to get a great deal of aid and that the North Vietnamese were the chief violators of the ceasefire accord. That was printed in the New Yorker magazine under the byline of Robert Chaplin, as indeed was a great deal of such information which we tried to circulate.
Frank, a two-part question. What were the objectives of or what was the objective of the CIA? What about the moral implications of what you were doing in feeding disinformation? Did the objective override the moral implications, moral problems?
Well, the objective of the agency in general is to generate intelligence and get it back to Washington, to get at the truth and make sure the policymakers understand it. When you plant disinformation, you are diverging from that objective, and I think probably in retrospect, it was very counterproductive. I am, as an ex-CIA agent, opposed to the disinformation activities in which I was involved. I admit that I was involved, and I think it served no useful purpose. Propagandizing the American public or Congress is not the CIA's job. As to the morality of what the CIA was doing or that particular activity, the war was a very relative thing. It was a relativist environment, and morality seldom came into play when you were operating in the field. In my estimation, a CIA man should be amoral. That may sound pretty shocking to somebody, but what if my morality were that of a Nazi or agent, if you will? You wouldn't want me to be your intelligence officer. Keep the morals out of intelligence. Keep the truth in, and stay away from disinformation.
It would have been more appropriate for Mr. Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, to address this House according to Article 144, an article which was specifically designed to debate violations of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, which is clearly the case with Mr. Trudeau. Then again, a Prime Minister who openly admires the Chinese basic dictatorship, who tramples on fundamental rights by persecuting and criminalizing his own citizens as terrorists just because they dared to stand up to his perverted concept of democracy, should not be allowed to speak in this House at all. Mr. Trudeau, you are a disgrace for any democracy. Please spare us your presence. Thank you.
And it might sound radical, colleagues, but the answer to war is not more war, it's peace. And peace isn't delivered by the barrel of a gun, it's delivered by diplomacy, by dialogue. You can wish away your continent's history, but we share a continent with Russia. We will sit down with Russia. There will be a negotiated peace, and this organisation should be promoting it earlier rather than delaying it and making sure that more Ukrainians die. Your feigning of sympathy rings hollow. It makes me sick, to be honest with you.
We become involved when disinformation poses a threat to the security of our country. It is when there's a connectivity to a threat to our country. It could be a threat, a connectivity to violence. And what this working group does, is precisely what I would think you would want it to do, which is to take a look at the work, the disinformation work that our department has done, and ask the following questions. Do we have policies? Do we have guardrails? Do we have standards?
But here's the problem. We can't even agree. We can't even agree what disinformation is. You can't even agree that it was disinformation, that the Russians fed information to the Steele dossier. If you can't agree to that, how are we ever going to come to an agreement on what is disinformation so you can police it on social media?
Senator, I have 2 points, if I may finish. Number one, that what this office, what this working group does, because it's not an office, what this working group does is ensure that there are guardrails definitions, standards to make sure that the free speech rights, the civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy rights of individuals
So
are
do you
not
think
impinged.
do you think
Number
COVID
one.
do you think
And number
COVID do you
two,
think COVID
if I may,
do you think COVID disinformation threatens our national security?
And number two, if I may, Senator, and number two, is it your proposition that when the cartels spread disinformation with respect to our immigration policies to try to lure vulnerable migrants to our border illegally?
I think you've got no idea what disinformation is, and I don't think the government's capable of it. Do you know who the greatest propagator of disinformation in the history of the world is? The U.S. government. Are you familiar with McNamara, the Pentagon Papers? Are you familiar with George W. Bush and the weapons of mass destruction? Are you familiar with Iran-Contra? I mean, think of all the debates and disputes we've had over the last 50 years in our country. We work them out by debating them. We don't work them out by the government being the arbiter. I don't want you guardrails. I want you to have nothing to do with speech. You think we can't determine, speech by traffickers is disinformation? You think the American people are so stupid they need you to tell them what the truth is? You can't even admit what the truth is with the Steele dossier. I don't trust government to figure out what the truth is. Government is largely disseminating disinformation.
You would know this this is a bit of an aside, but in terms of how you think about problem sets, when I was a cadet, what's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses.
We had a good discussion on ensuring global energy security and adequate oil supplies to support global economic growth, and that will begin shortly. I'm doing all I can to increase the supply for the United States of America, which I expect to happen. The Saudis share that urgency, and based on our discussions today, I expect we'll see further steps in the coming weeks.
Are you worried about
Hey everyone, just as a reminder, our show starts at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, just a few minutes from now, but I should remind you that we have a daily newsletter. It's totally free. Natalie and I work very hard on it every morning over a cup of coffee, putting the stories together that we think are important that the mainstream media is going to ignore. All you need to do is go to our website. It's just redacted.inc. Put in your email address. We won't ever sell your email to anybody. And then you'll receive a welcome email. And all you need to do is verify that email, and 7 a.m. Eastern Time is when we send out our daily newsletter. And it's about 5 or 10 minutes in length that you can read it over your cup of coffee. And like I said, we cover 4 or 5 of the big stories of the day, plus a couple of things you might have missed while you were sleeping. We try to have some fun with it, add a little humor into it. And again, it's a great way to start off your morning. But it's also a great way for us to stay connected with you as well, because we've been banned and blocked on some of these platforms before, where we haven't been allowed to post anything, not even a community post. So the only way for us to stay connected with you is through our newsletter. We were able to send out a newsletter and say, hey everyone, we're blocked for the next week, and let you know what was actually going on with our show. Anyway, go to redacted.inc and sign up for the free newsletter, and it'll be posted first thing in the morning over your cup of coffee.
One of the hopeful things that I've discovered is that nearly every war that has started in the past 50 years has been a result of media lies. The media could have stopped it if they had searched deep enough. If they hadn't reprinted government propaganda, they could have stopped it. But what does that mean? Well, that means basically populations don't like wars. And populations have to be fooled into wars. Populations don't willingly and with open eyes go into a war. So if we have a good media environment, then we'll also have a peaceful environment.
You killed a million people in Iraq.
That is a separate...
You killed a million people in Iraq. It's incredible that you have the brass neck to be sitting here now urging another Iraq war
George,
after
if
what
I
you've
was
already
still in
done.
Parliament,
There can be no doubt that Saddam Hussein has biological weapons and the capability to rapidly produce more, many more. And he has the ability to dispense these lethal poisons and diseases in ways that can cause massive death and destruction. If biological weapons seem too terrible to contemplate, chemical weapons are equally chilling. UNMOVIC already laid out much of this, and it is documented for all of us to read in UNSCOM's 1999 report on the subject. If we consider just one category of missing weaponry, 6,500 bombs from the Iran-Iraq war, UNMOVIC says the amount of chemical agent in them would be on the order of 1,000 tons. These quantities of chemical weapons are now unaccounted for. Dr. Blick says, quipped that, quote, mustard gas is not marmalade. You are supposed to know what you did with it. We believe Saddam Hussein knows what he did with it, and he has not come clean with the international community. We have evidence these weapons existed. What we don't have is evidence from Iraq that they have been destroyed or where they are. That is what we are still waiting for.
Okay, inspection worth doing, everybody's agreed it's worth doing, and it gets stopped.
Yes, sir.
At that moment, we're an automatic pilot as far as you're concerned. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, I respect that. But now, it seems to me the Secretary of State might have a slightly different problem. Secretary of State might be sitting there and saying, now look over there on that side. Now, I remember so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and the 12 people on this side, they're all the ones that said they didn't want to use force. Now, I'm going to have to go tell the president now that we should, or Secretary Cohen, unleash whatever it takes to get it done. And our military assessment is the same as the majors. The majors' assessment is, privately held but publicly acknowledged later, that airstrikes alone aren't going to do this. Saddam's not going to cave on this. So, now here's the deal. I recommended the president have at it and let the chips fall where they may. A reasonable position for the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State to take. But I respectfully suggest, Major, I respectfully suggest they have a responsibility slightly above your pay grade. Slightly above your pay grade. To decide whether or not to take the nation to war alone. Or to take the nation to war partway, or to take the nation to war halfway. That's a real tough decision. That's why they get paid the big bucks. That's why they get the limos and you don't. I mean this sincerely. I'm not trying to be flip, because I think, and that's why I said at the outset, the reason why I'm glad you did what you did, we should come to our milk. We should make a decision. But in terms of whether the Secretary of State has no more to consider than you do as the arms inspector. You didn't get in, didn't get my job done, get me in. Period. You made the deal, right? That's the deal. A deal's a deal. Get me in. Scott Ritter, I'm ready to go. It's not how it works. Now, maybe it should work that way. But wouldn't you acknowledge that if you were President of the United States or the Secretary of State, you'd sit there and say, now, okay, old Scotty boy didn't get in. We said he should get in. We want him to get in. It's important that he does get in. They're not going to let him in. So what are we going to do now? We know that France and Russia aren't going to be with us. We're quite confident China's not. We've already run those traps. They're not there. We're not sure where the United States Senate is, but have at it, boys. Go get them. And by the way, Scott and the boys say air power's not enough. I think it's a legitimate debate, Scott, Major. I think it's a legitimate debate. But I don't think we should be putting it in the context of, you have somebody up there at state saying, look, how can we weasel out of this agreement? We want to let this guy out there hanging. We're not this. It's a very practical political decision. Same kind of decision General Powell made. Same kind of decision President Bush made. Every president, every Secretary of State has to do it. Like I said, they get paid more than you. Their job's a hell of a lot more complicated than yours. They may have made the wrong decision, and you brought it to light. We should address it. We should say straight up where we are, and we should do it. And for that, I thank you. But it's above your pay grade.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a second." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." I said, "We're going to war with Iraq? Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper. He said, "I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
Hey everyone, Clayton here. The show is going to start at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. I should remind you that we have a VIP community. It's our Redacted Rebel VIP community. Now, this show is totally free, what you're watching right now, right? You can subscribe here on YouTube and Rumble, totally free. But if you'd like to support independent journalism, we are run by you. Without you guys, we wouldn't be able to do this show. We wouldn't be able to hire the team that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the servers that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the reporters that we have, the team that we have. So you can support us by going to redacted.inc, and on the right side of your screen, you'll see a VIP community button. Just click that, and for the price of a cup of coffee once a month, you can support us. We put out exclusive content, early interviews that no one else will see, live streams just for our VIP Rebel community. So again, it's totally free to watch this show, but if you do want to support independent journalism, we would really appreciate it. Come on over to redacted.inc, click on that community button, and decide if you want to sign up or not. It's totally up to you. We thank you. And meanwhile, the show will start in just a few moments at 4 p.m. Eastern Time.
Well, one of the 4 principal functions of the CIA is to gather intelligence and ideally forward it to the president, the users of information, the policymakers, as they say. There are other functions, however, some of them more legitimate than others. One is to run secret wars, the covert action that's written and talked about so much, like what's happening in Nicaragua today from Honduras. Another thing is to disseminate propaganda to influence people's minds, and this is a major function of the CIA. And unfortunately, of course, it overlaps into the gathering of information. You have contact with a journalist, you will give him true stories, you'll get information from him, you'll also give him false stories. For example, in my war, the Angola war that I helped to manage, 1/3 of my staff was propaganda. Ironically, it's called covert action inside the CIA. Outside, that means the violent part. I had propagandists all over the world, principally in London, Kinshasa, and Zambia. We would take stories which we would write and put them in the Zambia Time, and then pull them out and send them to a journalist on our payroll in Europe. But his cover story, you see, would be that he'd gotten them from his stringer in Lusaka, who had gotten them from the Zambia Time. We had the complicity of the government of Zambia, Kenneth Kaunda, if you will, to put these false stories into his newspapers. But after that point, the journalists, Reuters and AFP, the management was not witting of it. Now, our contact man in Europe was, and we pumped just dozens of stories about Cuban atrocities, Cuban rapists. In one case, we had the Cuban rapists caught and tried by the Ovimbundu maidens who had been their victims, and then we ran photographs that made almost every newspaper in the country of the Cubans being executed by the Ovimbunda women who supposedly had been their victims.
But these were fake photos?
Oh, absolutely. We didn't know of one single atrocity committed by the Cubans. It was pure, raw, false propaganda to create an illusion of communists, eating babies for breakfast and that sort of totally false propaganda.
The only reason that I'm allowed to ask you this question is because today the federal court ruled that the government doesn't have the right to determine who is or is not a journalist. This is the second election in a row that the court had to overturn your government. Do you still insist on being able to make that decision, and why?
First of all, questions around accreditation were handled by the press gallery and the consortium of networks who have strong perspectives on quality journalism and the important information that is shared with Canadians. The reality is organizations like yours that continue to spread misinformation and disinformation on the science around vaccines, around how we're going to actually get through this pandemic and be there for each other and keep our kids safe, is part of why we're seeing such unfortunate anger and lack of understanding of basic science. And quite frankly, I won't call it a media organization, your group of individuals need to take accountability for some of the polarization that we're seeing in this country. And I think Canadians are cluing into the fact that there is a really important decision we take about the kind of country we want to see. And I salute all extraordinary, hardworking journalists that put science and facts at the heart of what they do and ask me tough questions every day, but make sure that they are educating and informing Canadians from a broad range of perspectives, which is the last thing that you guys do.
Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security. A challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome into Redacted on this Thursday. I'm Clayton Morris.
I'm Natali Morris.
So glad to have you here. On this show, we tend to cover the stories the mainstream media largely ignores, and we hold powerful people to account. On the show tonight, we're going to look at the war in Ukraine and why the EU is getting ready to send troops into Ukraine as security forces, security guarantee. Maybe they could call up their friends over at the UN and ask for peacekeepers, peacekeepers, security forces. They don't do anything other than hang out and provide security. So we'll look at the latest on Ukraine.
Plus, the FDA seems to be fast-tracking lab-grown meat. We've got chicken, which was approved a few weeks ago, and now beef. What do we think about this? Is this good for us? Is this good for the planet? We're going to discuss that.
Also, Dan Cohen is back, and there's been a firestorm around his reporting on the country of Colombia and his run-in with Ivan Duque on the streets of D.C. Well, the media there has gone on the attack. Dan is going to be here to break down why exactly they're coming to Duque's defense. We'll cover all of that.
Plus, we have a COVID story at the end of the show today. It will only be on one platform and not another. We'll let you guess which one and why. Because the rules of COVID still persist, even though we are past the pandemic. So we think past this pandemic. All of that and more as Redacted starts right now. Well, let me just correct something I said. I said there is lab-grown beef. Not yet, but it tastes like chicken.
Yuck.
Get it?
I got it. Man, have you seen all the craziness? I mean, there's just stories we're not going to really dive deep into tonight at all. But, I mean, have you seen, first of all, let's see, in Canada. So, David, you just sent this a few minutes ago, but I saw another report on this. So, Canada is getting ready. Google says they're not going to put any news links anymore on Google News because, you know, Canada's clamping down on social media posts. They want to charge social media companies for any news posts. So Google's like, hey, we're done then. We're not going to, Canada, you want to take away free speech, then we're not posting news links in Canada anymore.
I wonder if Yandex will pay for that. Then they'll have the exact opposite of what they intend to do.
So you won't have any news in Canada anymore, pretty much.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And do you see this?
Other than your government approved.
Yeah, your government-approved CBC News. Like, that's all you'll get anymore. Also, see this Madonna story. Like, what the world is going on with this Madonna story?
I don't know.
Well, she was like seen like wandering around the streets of New York City, and now she was in the hospital, and she's out now apparently, and her family says she was on the verge of death. Like, what's going on?
And she was intubated. Yeah, I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know. A bunch of crazy stories. And then we have the Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action.
Yes, ruling against affirmative action. In fact, that is a crazy story that I can't wait to dive deep into, but it happened too late in the afternoon today, so we haven't been able to research that any further or read the opinions. It is actually something that I am in favor of, this ruling, and so I'm interested in seeing what will then happen. I mean, will we... Don't get crazy here. Will we actually live in a society where people are judged on the content of their performance and character? I'm just asking.
You mean like a
meritocracy?
Meritocracy where people, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe let us know in the comments if you think that that's going to happen anytime soon. We've got a lot of news to get to, though, on this Thursday, so we will. But first, we want to tell you about our newsletter, which is totally free. You should sign up for it. And it brings a lot of value to your morning, first thing in the morning. Go to redacted.inc and put in your email address and sign up, and then you'll receive the newsletter. You have to verify your email, though, because it might go to your spam folder or your junk folder. Make sure you go there and look for it. You'll get an email from me, Clayton at redacted.inc. I'm the one that sends the email. And then just confirm it and move it over to your inbox. And then tomorrow morning, first thing in the morning, you'll get the newsletter first thing in the morning. And that's the way to do it. So redacted.inc is the place to go to get your daily newsletter. Again, redacted.inc. All right, let's start with the war in Ukraine tonight and cover this because we got a couple of pieces of news to cover. First, the EU out with this report stating that they may send military missions to Ukraine under future guarantees, according to this report that came out just a few hours ago. EU countries do not exclude sending military missions to Ukraine with the consent of member states within the framework of future security commitments.
Okay.
So that means the EU leaders will also pledge to expand the bloc's initiative to train Ukrainian troops, as well as the possibility of sending EU military missions to Ukraine, if conditions deemed suitable and agreed by all members, according to the British newspaper.
And this is where you see this mission creep happening in the United States when legislators are starting to put legislation in place that says that the United States has to help Ukraine. It's been sort of a push and pull. The United States really wants to lead the pact and Europe to just do whatever they say. Like, we're supporting Ukraine, we're sending these troops. Europe has always been a little, we're not going to do what you say. Okay, we're going to do it. Yes, we are, and it's here and there. It's hither and thither, European sentiment on it. And so now European leaders are saying, well, it would be peaceful. That usually doesn't work out the way it seems. When the United Nations sends peacekeepers, it usually goes about the same way it does. That's the same name of the troops in the Hunger Games, is they're not there for peace at all. They're there for militant conformity.
Yeah. So earlier, Moscow, of course, cautioned against Western nations sending NATO troops to Ukraine, saying that it could lead to dangerous consequences. So this is basically them sending NATO troops to Ukraine.
Right.
Like under these auspices. So there you go. That's one big piece of the story today.
Another piece is that Ukrainian President Zelensky, he's not doing much for peace. But you may consider this a peaceful movement if you consider peace by the kind that you get from getting high. This is Zelensky on Wednesday addressing Parliament. I don't have an English translation, but what he's saying is that he wants to fast track marijuana legalization in Ukraine so that Ukrainians can cope with the trauma of war. I don't have a translation video, but I have this quote here. What he says is, we must finally fairly legalize cannabis-based medicines for all those who need them with appropriate scientific research and controlled Ukrainian production. That's interesting because marijuana doesn't grow there. So I'm not sure. I mean, maybe in like a pot on your windowsill, but it's not a major growth area. He says all the world's best practices, all the most effective policies, all the solutions, no matter how difficult or unusual they may seem to us, must be applied to Ukraine so that Ukrainians, all our citizens, do not have to endure the pain, stress, and trauma of war. I mean, I know what you can do to make it so that they don't have to endure the pain, stress, and trauma of war is stop the war, and indeed attend peace talks. But he has passed a law that makes it a crime to attend peace talks at all. So barring that, he sort of wants to anesthetize his population. Like, what I'm doing is wrong. Here's some drugs. Smoke this up and you'll care less. How do you feel about that, boys?
I mean, it's really troubling to think, well, we need to, of course, drugs and alcohol, of course, have been used for by governments for decades to anesthetize the population. I mean, Japan recently, after the pandemic, was like, hey, you're not drinking enough. You should start drinking some more Japanese whiskey. Literally, the Japanese government pushing this. And so this idea of sort of keeping your population anesthetized is really, really troubling. I mean, it's like, it's so traumatic that we need to have people hopped up on something to keep them sedated.
Yeah.
Well, not even sedated. Just look at the whole pharmaceutical industry. I mean, that's like one big, like, that's what they want further. If we can't get you with this drug, we're going to get you with this one. If we can't get you with this one, we'll get you with this one. That's like, they just want you to be on some kind of drug, whatever it is, period.
You got to think you're right about that. You would think that like Pfizer, the biopharmaceutical complex, would call up Zelensky like, hey, we saw your press conference where you want pot. We've got a lot of other stuff. Okay.
Right.
Let's make a deal.
For you.
Let's make a deal. We've got a lot of other things we could be sending. Have you noticed how America has an opioid epidemic?
Percocet?
Have you ever seen oxycodone? We can bring that in boatloads to your country like we did in the United States.
What? No, like what do you call it? Where they're not going to get in trouble.
Oh yeah, they'll get amnesty.
No liability.
No liability. Oh yes,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, and if you look at the quote that he said, we want to, legalize cannabis-based medicines with appropriate scientific research and controlled Ukrainian production. You're in a war. You have time to research marijuana? And what? We didn't think that are your priorities here. Let's just go to the map again to take a look at where the map stands today. The red area, again, is in Russian control. The dark gray area is the area that has been voted into Russian control and asked Russia to intervene so they would stop being attacked by Ukraine, which has been happening since 2014. The blue dots is where Ukraine has mounted their counteroffensives, and they're less and less every time I show this map. And Russia has easily put those counteroffensives down. The blue circle is where Zelensky is working on weed. He's nowhere near the battlefield talking to Parliament about getting high. Now, in a recent article from Der Spiegel, Ukrainian soldiers were interviewed, and they said that part of their training on German tanks, after they were sort of showed buttons that they didn't understand in German, they were taken to this nightclub. And this quote has stayed with me for the last few days because I find it really haunting. It says, on the evening after their training, they went to a club not far from Munster. He says it was the first time he had been out in almost a year and a half. And the guy said, I stayed all night. It wouldn't have been worth it for just a couple hours. He says loud music, techno and trance, perfect for forgetting. Well, these boys here that were shown in this article, they're 22. They don't want to fight. They want to go home and live. They're scared and untrained, and they would be better off if the war was ended today.
Yeah, in fact, there's a Forbes piece. Forbes, by the way, is not exactly a, I don't know, I wouldn't say it's like Redacted. I wouldn't say it's like, I don't know, what's another good example? I mean, it's a mainstream media publication. I mean, it's like Forbes, it's like Bloomberg, right? Forbes magazine. It's like picking up a copy of Bloomberg, right? Your mainstream media. They have a big report about all of these Ukrainian missing brigades. Can't find them. They're missing in action, these mechanized brigades. They can't find them. Where is the Ukrainian Army's 117th Mechanized Brigade? These they're disappeared.
Disappeared, or you see sometimes on social media that they surrender. They just straight out surrender to Russian troops because Russian troops have allowed it. They don't harm them if they surrender. And a lot of times, even in this Der Spiegel piece, this person says, it's better to, what is the quote here? He says it's better than to refuse to go into battle than to chicken out in the middle of the fight. This is what this young boy says. So what they're doing is either saying, I'm not going to go, or they try and make it into Russian territory and just surrender so that they can live. There was a viral video just last week of a Ukrainian soldier running to Russian lines, and the Russian soldier who rescued him said, congratulations, the war's over for you now. Sit here. And he gave him a bottle of water and a cigarette because they're not trained for this. They don't want to be here. They're being dragged into war. Now, the Ukrainian government has passed a law that means that even your apartment complex has to be complicit in searching for all military-aged men and dragging them to report for military service, no matter what. But more people. Go ahead.
I was going to say, if you have a legitimate reason to get passionate about what you're fighting for, that's different. You would have people volunteering at the front line, like, we're going to do this because we have to. This is our lives depend on it, or something depends on it. If I were over there, I could not for the life of me figure out, like, what am I doing this for? Like, my life is not on the line. These people's lives aren't on the line. Russia's not like coming in and just mass hurting civilians and all this other stuff. Like, why are we here? What are we doing this for? Like, that would be my question. And these guys don't have an answer to that. And they're getting dragged out because they're not getting an answer and they don't want to fight. So it's like, I don't blame them.
Well, they're fighting for land that has been asking for Russia to help them for almost a decade, and that voted to become Russia and wants to stay a part of Russia. And they're fighting to get it back for Ukraine where they don't want to be. Now, what Russia feels like is they have to hold this line because these people have been asking them for over a decade to intervene. In fact, I came across this headline this week from 2016. Take a look at this from The Guardian. In 2015, the International Monetary Fund said they didn't want to lend any more money to Ukraine unless it stopped raging its war in the Donbass. They ended up lending anyway. And then a year later, here is Christine Lagarde again from the IMF saying, we really can't stop lending, can't keep lending money to Ukraine. They're not good for it. They're too corrupt, and they keep waging this war on the Donbass. So they're taking our money, throwing it into a war, and keep running up the debt. Now, at the time, even Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko admitted that the war was costing Ukraine $8 million per day. This is, look at this headline, you guys, 2015, that Ukraine's war in the Donbass is costing $8 million per day and blowing through their IMF loans. The West knew this. The media knew this. We all are pretending that we didn't know that these people have been being slaughtered for 10 years and asked Russia to intervene. It's no wonder they did. Take a look at this Time magazine article, again from 2014, saying these Ukrainians are waiting for Russia to come and invade so that they can rejoin Russia and have their safety, is how they felt about it. So why should a young Ukrainian die to win back territory that does not want to be a part of Ukraine, never did, voted in 2014 to not be a part of Ukraine, which is why they've been terrorized ever since. Why throw human lives at this? And for Russia, it's a this or that. Like, if they give up that line, the people inside of that Donbass territory then have to be attacked again.
Well, I don't know if this went viral today. I don't know if you guys saw it on CNN. Aaron Burnett had an interview with an American who's fighting in Ukraine, and was asking him, like, well, why are you fighting Russians? You're an American in Ukraine fighting Russians. And he's like, well, and basically his sentiment was, well, I don't want Russia to have the resources. So wait a minute.
The mines, you mean?
Well, yeah.
The natural resource mines.
Minerals. Land. Like, wait a minute. You're an American. So basically you're admitting that America and BlackRock and these others have basically bought up all of Ukraine. So you don't want Russia to have these resources. So an American is in Ukraine fighting Russians for resources? It's like Iraq all over again. We don't want them to have the oil.
It's a colonial thing to say. Like, you should not benefit from the resources of the land you live on.
Yeah.
That's how the Congo lives. That's how much of Africa lives, because they're resource rich and monetarily poor. And so he wants this place to live like the Congo,
I guess,
so that other places benefit from resources of that land.
Let me see if I can play.
That's so colonial.
How crazy is it too to think that there are people that are passionate enough, they hate Russians enough, that they're willing to attack civilians, Russian civilians, the civilians that don't want to be part of Ukraine, yet they don't want to stand up to Russia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, that's just...
Let me see if I can show you this interview. People are asking, can we play it here? And I didn't intend to do this, but I have it saved. If you see if we can play the audio here, Philip, see. Well, this...
All you got to do, Clayton, you need to change your audio source to the HD 60S Plus.
Okay, just give me a second then. We'll come back to it in a second then.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, in the meantime, while he works that out, I'll show you a few more updates about the war, because Russia seems to be able to put down these counteroffensives pretty handily lately. If you take a look at this, Russian forces said that they today, they have eliminated troops and ammo in 3 areas where Ukraine has been attacking. They also destroyed 2 U.S.-made radars and intercepted HIMARS. Meanwhile, Ukraine is saying, wait, the counteroffensive, the main act hasn't started yet. Here, talking to the Financial Times, is Alexei Reznikov, Ukraine's defense minister, and he said this to the Financial Times: when it happens, you'll all see it. It's like you'll know it when you see it type thing. Everyone will see everything. It's like a snowball. The bigger it gets, the faster it rolls. So right now it's just a baby snowball, which I would say is really insulting to the people who died already in the first counteroffensive. Okay, then those people were the opening act, and now the main act is coming on stage later. So we just should wait for it. Those people, if your loved one had been lost and it was just like, oh, it's not it yet, how would you feel about that? Do you think you would want marijuana to cope, or would you want peace talks? Are you ready?
I think so. Are we ready to play this, David?
a dark, chilly,
you're
wet
ready.
night here in Dnipro. So you're just obviously off the front lines nearby as well, and you've shared some GoPro footage, sort of that when you're in your vest that you wear on your chest, that sort of shows your perspective as you're gathering intelligence to try to target Russian forces. I want to show some of the things that you've experienced that you're willing to share. This is a really intense confrontation that you had with Russian forces recently, just a few weeks ago in the counteroffensive. You came under fire and you had to retreat, and I just want to play that part so people can actually see a little bit, get a sense of what it's like in those moments. Just listen.
Sure.
Last year, a brief visit home for the birth of your son.
Yes.
You're putting your life in danger to help another country, and I think everybody wants to understand what drives you to do it, Garrison.
Well, part of it is a lot of people aren't aware of this, but the Ukrainians sent soldiers to Afghanistan after 9/11. They were part of the forces that were there, and they were under no obligation to do so. And so to me, it's, they came to us in our time of need, and I see no reason not to go to them in their time of need as well. This is a very resource-dense area. I don't want Russia to get a hold of those resources and then leverage that to kind of destabilize the world and create more war.
Okay, did you know that Putin was one of the first people to call President Bush after 9/11 and actually opened up Russian bases to launch any counteroffensive on the Taliban?
Yeah.
So by that logic, you should be fighting for Russia because they also helped to respond to 9/11.
This guy's cool with the U.S. starting a bunch of wars, but just as long as Russia doesn't do it.
Well, they were in Afghanistan.
Yeah, but the resources, guys.
It's the resources.
Right.
So they were in Afghanistan killing random Afghanis for what reason exactly? Also, like you're justifying, well, they were there to help us fight for freedom in Afghanistan. And you could go back something earlier, David, that you said, which is like, well, why are we there? Like, why are we in Afghanistan? Why are we there why are we in Iraq? What are we doing? I'm here to make sure that you have oil because Saddam went into Kuwait. Like, that's what I'm going to give my son. So this big marketing campaign would tie yellow ribbons around the trees and, and we're standing for freedom. And then, now we're standing for freedom once again in Ukraine to a guy who literally just stopped elections. So you can't vote. So no more elections under martial law. Like, that's what we're standing for. Yeah. And their resources. We want to make sure that these resources don't get in the hands of Russians. We need these resources back in America.
Yeah, and I apologize. I meant Al-Qaeda, not the Taliban.
Okay.
You should not confuse those two, and I apologize for having done that.
Interesting stuff. Okay, we've got more news to get to here on your Thursday. We're going to look at lab-grown meat and who could possibly be behind this new lab-grown meat. Let me know in the comments. You got one guess. You can each get like two guesses. Who do you think is behind the lab-grown meat that you're all about to start eating in America?
Martha Stewart.
I say the gates are open. The gates are open on that one.
Yeah, the gates are wide open. You guys will allow you to make a decision here in the chat. Just drop us your thoughts on that. Also, Dan Cohen is going to be back to talk about this Colombia story, which has has exploded. I mean, the mainstream media in Colombia. You thought America's media was corrupt. Whew, you ain't seen nothing yet. Wait till we tell you about what has unfolded down there. We'll get to that. So let's talk about this. You might want to check the label the next time you buy chicken at your grocery store because it might have come from a lab backed by Bill Gates. If you guessed Bill Gates for your lab-grown meat, if Bill Gates was on your lab-grown meat bingo card, then you win the night.
Okay. Do you picture this like in Star
of
Wars where she like 1/4 portion and then she puts water in it?
Yeah,
becomes big.
Disgust. That's what I picture, and that's actually what it is. We're going to show you some video of this in a second here. That it might have come from lab. The meat that you buy at the grocery store might have come from a lab backed by Bill Gates instead of a farm. This story might leave you questioning the very essence of our food supply. Over the past few days, the United States Department of Agriculture, the kids call it the USDA for short, has just approved the sale of lab-grown meat from not one, but two companies funded by Bill Gates. That's right, folks. The man who wants to control every aspect of our lives is now trying to dictate what we eat. The two companies that just won approval are company number one called Good Meat. The company number two is Upside Foods. First, Can we just take notice of their names? Good Meat and Upside Foods. Good Meat's parent company is called Eat Just. In other words, the meat you currently are eating from a farm is bad meat or somehow unethical, is what they're saying with these names, right? I work at Eat Just because I'm a just person.
Oh, it'll work. It'll work. Look at all the people that buy all natural and all that from the grocery stores because it just sounds like it's the right thing to do.
For sure.
I eat at Good Meat. Oh, I get my meat from Good Meat. So it's not a slaughtered meat. It's good meat.
And
it's
what's the name of the Impossible Meat? The burgers that have...
The Impossible Burger, yeah.
And there's the other one. Yep. There's what's the competitor to that?
Beyond Meat?
Beyond. Okay.
Beyond.
Yeah, Beyond.
Okay.
So, their names are one thing, right? That basically your meat is bad. Somehow you're unethical for the meat you eat. You're currently unjust if you eat from a farm. We'll unpack that in a minute. Let's start with what proponents of lab-grown meat say about it. First, they say this process eliminates the need for animal slaughter, paving the way for meat production that doesn't require any animals at all. Secondly, proponents of lab-grown meat, the stuff you're seeing here on your screen, shows that there are significant environmental benefits. They say this, right? That traditional animal agriculture contributes significantly to greenhouse gas emissions and deforestation. Again, this is what they say.
But it does require an animal. You need to pluck a feather or something to get the DNA. You do need a host.
Right. You do need animal proteins. This is why it's not, for vegetarians, for vegans, you can't have this lab-grown meat because it still comes from animal proteins, right? So if
they're going to pluck feathers for beef, they're doing it wrong already. So I'm going to throw that out there.
Some sort of dinosaur meat. Anyway, first they say this process eliminates the need for animal slaughter, paving the way for meat production that doesn't require any animals at all. Secondly, proponents of lab-grown meat claim that there are significant environmental benefits. Traditional animal agriculture contributes significantly to greenhouse gas emissions and deforestation. Again, this is what they say. And how exactly does this work? Well, according to Andrew Noyes, who is the head of PR for Good Meat's parent company called Eat Just, the lab-grown meat, stuff in the Petri dish, also known as cell-based or cultivated meat, is produced directly from animal cells, cultivated in what he calls bioreactors, with the help of nutrients like amino acids. He says to picture massive brewery-like vats, rather than petri dishes in sterile laboratories. Once ready, the meat is then collected from these bioreactors and then processed. He says it looks like minced chicken when it's completed. Do we have video of this?
We did from something. We had an image of the lab the last time I covered something like this. But I don't know.
That's right. We can add it in post.
Okay.
That was just the B-roll that we were talking about.
Yeah.
Anyway, he says it looks like minced chicken when it's completed. Now you might be wondering, why should we be worried about lab-grown meat? Well, for starters, it's an affront to our traditional agricultural industry, which has been the backbone of the United States for centuries. And family farms are being crushed by regulations, and now they face direct competition from these lab-grown alternatives. I think it's a direct attack. I mean, it's really, to my mind, a direct attack on our hardworking farmers and ranchers who have dedicated their lives to feeding America and, frankly, the rest of the world. But we're focusing on America in this story. We recently had a Wyoming rancher on the show who talked about these attacks, and she talked about this lab-grown meat problem.
So I'm certainly not an expert on, how much land they require. What I do know that we saw in the United States was the meatless options were the last things left in the meat case. During the pandemic, everybody was eating the real products. Every food source has an environmental footprint, period, right? There's an environmental impact to everything that we eat, whether it's plant or whether it's animal. What I do know is here in the United States, we are losing hundreds of acres of some of our best quality crop ground every single day as urban expansion occurs. They're building housing developments, they're putting up schools and parking lots and, shopping structures. And that's land we will never get back in production. Land is a finite resource. And so, we can't make more of it. So where's all of this additional food going to come from? Because to even come close to replacing the nutrition that we would need to replace by eliminating animal source proteins, how would we ever begin to grow enough additional crops without the land being available to do that? And I think that's something that I constantly ask that no one has an answer for, because the reality is I don't think that you can. We simply do not have the land available.
But the implications go beyond economic devastation. Go ahead, David.
Well, I was going to ask, think about the ecosystem. So it's what are you going to have? You're going to have solely now milk producing and nothing else. No more leather, no more. There's not going to be this circle of things that come from one animal. It's not like it's just producing meat. They have different things that they produce. So it's you're going to have to get those sources from somewhere. And then you have all of these cattle. What are they going to do? Just euthanize them and waste that meat? Because the whole industry will be disrupted. That just makes zero sense.
Right. And she talks about in this interview about how much carbon or nitrogen, I can't remember, is trapped under ranches like this, because there's a whole circle in place, is that when these grazing animals graze, they encourage the growth of plants, which is good for the environment. This is all true. So we would just completely remove this from the ecosystem.
Yeah. And so, it's devastating for these farmers. It's devastating for the economy. It's devastating for the ecology, but they don't want to admit it. They want to kind of pretend that it's not, and they'd rather focus on the meat that you're getting from these farmers. And the implications go beyond this economic devastation. Lab-grown meat poses serious health risks, by the way. The mainstream media conveniently ignores this part of the story. These synthetic creations are produced in laboratories using unknown chemicals and processes. We have no idea what the long-term effects of consuming such unnatural products might be in our bodies. Are we willing to sacrifice our health for this sort of convenience of lab-grown meat? Bill Gates doesn't want you to think about this.
Well, I think that it speaks to... Did you want to let him speak?
No.
I think it speaks to, though, the sort of faddism of food, especially in the American diet, because people will sort of buy into it, and the stock market will buy into it. So when you think about the popularity of Beyond Burger, Impossible Burger, it seems very chic. The last time I was in the U.S., I couldn't get over how many aisles of collagen coffee powders there were in the Whole Foods. And I was like, what the hell is this? This is new since I was home last. Collagen coffee, we love that shit. We eat it up because if it seems like it's going to promote anything and we can put it into something else, right? It's just, it's almost too easy. It's too easy to manipulate us with food fashion.
Yeah.
Well, and also if you think about it, if they take control of all the farms and they make it basically illegal to produce meat. So you have ranchers that produce good meat right now, right? So they have no control over what they can put in that meat. What they can put in the milk. If they're making it in a lab, they can put whatever they want in it and not tell us. We'll be getting inoculated with all kinds of stuff, most likely, and it's we'd have no control. So that's why I having the ability to go to a local farmer and get meat that I know how it's raised. I know what it's eating. I know what's in its body. But I think they're losing control of that regulation because that movement is getting a lot more popular. More people are eating that way. More people want to know where their food comes from. And I don't think they like that.
And making demands of these ranchers to say, hey, the food that we do not want mRNA shots in this meat. Can you make sure that there's no mRNA shots going into this beef? And ranchers can say, yeah, I can do that, and I can serve you specifically. This is the meat that we're not using these shots with, and these antibiotics and these other things. So, are we willing to sacrifice our health for the convenience of this lab-grown meat? Bill Gates doesn't want you to think about that. In fact, Bill Gates is the biggest backer of these companies. He's heavily funded these lab-grown meat companies to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. But when you dive more deeply into where his money is going, you're going to notice something interesting. Bill Gates, a few years ago, planted the seed with the mainstream media and $13 million to media organizations. Listen to this. He had the goal, of course, of pushing a plant-based meat narrative. He donated $13 million to The Atlantic magazine and The Guardian. And soon after he donated money to these newspapers, well, they started writing articles about fake meat. It's amazing how money buys the media. Look at this headline. This is in The Guardian after he donates the money. Plant-based meat, by far the best climate investment, report finds. Here's another one. Oh, The Guardian's really on this beat suddenly. Why is The Guardian so obsessed with this? The most damaging farm products? Organic pasture-fed beef and lamb, writes The Guardian. Wow.
What?
Hey, thanks for the money, Bill Gates. Here's an article.
Take a look at the seed oil industry. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Here's another article from The Guardian. Remember The Guardian, by the way, was the newspaper that broke the
Edward Snowden.
I mean, how they have fallen. Anyway, here's The Guardian. Climate-friendly diets can make a huge difference, even if you don't go all out vegan. Yeah, here, eat the fake meat, it points out. Here's another one. Here's The Atlantic. Also took money from Bill Gates. What's different about the Impossible Burger?
It's gross.
And here's another one. Oh, and here's the other one. Plant-based food entrepreneurs are marketing their meatless products to omnivores. And then here's another Atlantic article. Will we ever stop eating animal meat, asks The Atlantic. Thanks for your money, Bill Gates. We need more moral arguments against meat. We need a technological revolution in better, cleaner food, by Derek Thompson. Hey, thanks for your money, Bill Gates. We'll write an article for you. This is how the media works. You send them $13 million and they will back your narrative. So how do we know that Gates is invested in promoting plant-based meat? Well, he's done countless interviews on the subject and he's put billions of dollars promoting it. Here he is during an MIT interview. Bill Gates' rich nations should shift entirely to synthetic beef, he says in this interview. Gates told the MIT Technology Review, quote, I don't think the poorest 80 countries will be eating synthetic meat. I do think all rich countries should move to 100% synthetic beef. He said, you can get used to the taste difference. And the claim is they're going to make it taste even better over time, he says. Eventually, that green premium is modest enough that you can sort of change your behavior of people or use regulation to totally shift the demand. I mean, reading that statement, it's like Dr. Evil statement that I'm reading.
Yes,
I mean,
but it's true, though, because if you can get someone convicted enough, for instance, we tried to eat gluten-free for a while and we still don't eat a lot of gluten. But in the United States, I would get these gluten-free bread products and I'd be like, it's the same, right, honey? Right? Like
we'd try to convince ourselves
I would try and convince myself that I could get used to it, that it was fine. And they're awful. And then if they get it close to tasting decent, it's filled with like 1,000 other chemicals. Yes. So what are you doing to yourself?
Well, think about how easy it was for them to get us all on board with CFL light bulbs. Like we all replaced every bulb in our house with CFL light bulbs. And then we found out later how bad they were. They can't get dispose of them. And it's like we all bought into it. So they can sell this stuff so easily on the convenience, on, hey, it's better for the environment. Like so many people are going to buy into this. And at the end of the day, like, then that's like perfect for them. I think it's funny too. I called Bill Gates the crossroads of corruption because it's like all of this corruption leads to him, and it's so weird.
Yeah. Well, what's weird too is that something's going on with Bill Gates because over the past few weeks, I have I've had Whitney Webb here on the show, and I've asked her this question. But then, why are suddenly we're getting this like mainstream media hit pieces on Bill Gates? It's weird. And then today, front page of the Wall Street Journal, big expose about how girls who would go and interview for jobs at his office were like asked all sorts of like sexual questions and all sorts of really creepy stuff. So something's about to happen to Bill Gates. There's some sort of
I wonder if he built Matt Lauer's door.
Who knows? Something's coming, though, for him. I don't know what it is, but there's some sort of something's unfolding. Anyway, just to go back to his statement, you can get used to the taste difference. And the claim is they're going to make it taste even better. And he says you can sort of change the behavior of people or use regulation to shift that demand. So he knows how this works. Basically going to force you to eat this. So he believes all rich countries should move to 100% synthetic beef, he says. This is a threat to our freedom of choice, in my opinion, because we have a God-given right to choose what we eat. And imagine a world where the only options available are a manufactured beef in a lab or a manufactured chicken in a lab, controlled by the likes of Bill Gates. That's what we're moving to. This is a step towards complete control over our food supply, giving powerful, hungry elites the ability to manipulate and dictate what we put on our plates. It's an assault on our individual freedoms and our right to make choices for ourselves. Just look at what's happening in the Netherlands today. Huge protests today, Thursday. In fact, we had a lot of viewers last night saying, oh, Thursday, big protests in the Netherlands for the farmers. Massive protests. They've taken 3,000 farms away. Farmers' lives ruined. Their goal is to remove all farms and traditional meat production, which they believe is killing the planet. With no evidence, by the way, they say this. Never mind, last week we saw a new report saying the Earth has actually been cooling over the last 20 years instead of heating up. But don't tell them that. By the way, that story got no mainstream media coverage. That was like a fart in the wind. It went away real fast, which is the best place to fart. So much for your cows are causing the Earth to heat up argument. So it's making the Earth get really warm and hot. Or is it? No, actually the opposite's happening. But that's inconvenient. But what about the environmental impact of this lab-grown meat? Is it somehow going to save the planet? Advocates claim it's more sustainable as an alternative, but that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, the resources required to produce lab-grown meat on a large scale are astronomical. In fact, it uses a massive amount of energy intensive that you wouldn't believe, not to mention the massive amounts of water and chemicals involved to make this happen. In fact, a recent study by UC Davis found that lab-grown meat could be up to 25 times worse for the environment. Up to 25 times worse. 25x, not like one time or two times. No, 25 times worse. Here is UC Davis in an interview in California. Watch.
New this morning, lab-grown meat made from animal cells is thought to be better for the environment, but a new study from UC Davis shows that lab-grown meat could potentially have a worse carbon footprint. Joining us live with the details of this new study is one of the authors, Edward Spank. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Happy to be here.
Edward, tell us the top takeaways from the study.
Yeah, so we conducted a study, and it shows that there's a risk that cultured meat actually might be worse for the environment in some situations than animal agriculture. Much of this risk is that, if we're using production methods typical of the pharmaceutical industry, it requires really resource-intensive ingredients to grow this material than if we grow it in sort of a food production environment.
Oh, interesting.
Who would have thought?
Next time, Edward, adjust your camera so you don't look like a tiny person. Anyway, to me, it's clear this so-called solution is actually exacerbating the very problems that it claims to solve. It's just another scheme by the World Economic Forum globalist agenda to control and manipulate the masses and to make billions of dollars of profits in the process. We must support our local farmers, I believe, and I think we need to reclaim our food system before it's too late. We are watching it slip away, guys. Thank you to the farmers in the Netherlands and the people in the Netherlands who are rising up and saying, hey, this political party, this fake political party that was supposed to be supporting us is actually not. And we need your support. 3,000 farms taken away. It's coming to the United States. It's happening already.
Yeah, and I feel like we're going to be inundating our body with synthetics. Like these synthetics aren't good. Everything that a cow produces is natural. I want to eat natural stuff that my body is able to break down naturally. My body has to figure out how to produce synthetics and how to break those down. And I don't want my body going through that, because who knows what that's going to do.
Yeah. I mean, you saw the World Health Organization today, after decades of legal battles about aspartame, finally, now the World Health Organization is going to label aspartame as a cancer-causing agent. Yeah, the stuff that's in Diet Coke.
And yogurt.
Yeah, the stuff that people eat, hey, it's aspartame, it's fine. At least I'm not putting on calories. No, but you are dying of cancer.
The stuff they don't allow in most countries other than the United States. There's some countries that won't allow that, and sodium benzoate too, which is a preservative we use here that they won't use in other countries.
So let us know your thoughts on this. Will you guys be eating the Bill Gates lab-grown meat?
Well, it's interesting because Bjorn Lomborg in his book, False Alarm, does talk about how this might revive the meat industry, how innovation is really going to get us out of climate change and not, these climate policies that politicians put forth, such as like King Charles this week put on a climate clock in London to tell us how much time we have left until 2030 and we hit this emissions goal or we don't. And so I do believe in the power of innovation to make certain changes, to make better cars, to make better stoves. Those kind of things do seem to be real solutions. But when you think about meat grown in the same way that vaccines are made, the way he put it, like it would work the same as the pharmaceutical industry, then I'm out. That's not the not the innovation that I want when it comes to meat.
Yeah, in a petri dish in a lab with all of those chemicals and those processes. Anyway, let us know.
And they're getting emergency use authorization for meat.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Did you guys get your meat? Did you guys get your meat injection?
Well, yeah. Then you think about those two merging, right? And it's like, oh, here's a meat with a DTaP vaccine. Just eat it. You'll be better off.
Well, that's the thing, right? We might be getting mRNA and other meat. Like you might be getting these vaccines shoved right in the meat, right in this process. You wouldn't even know it. Right.
Well,
to
we
David's point earlier.
Most of these cows are given ivermectin, and a lot of it passes through to their urine and gets into the soil. And so we do absorb those things in an indirect system, and all wet already.
Yeah. Unless you live in a bubble somehow. Anyway, we've got more news to get to here on this Thursday. We're going to look at this Dan Cohen story here in Colombia in just a moment. And we're going to talk about that I word that you just mentioned that you can't say on YouTube, but we will say it on Rumble because we're going to go over there with Dr. Pierre Corey, who's just written a whole book on the I word.
Oh, sorry. I said it about cows. Cows take it. We're not supposed to say it at all.
I don't know. They have, YouTube. You can't even say that word or they'll pull your
Yeah, I don't
down.
think Jimmy Dore says it all the time now. So.
Oh, okay, good.
Okay. And we weren't talking about the pandemic at all. Yes, horses and cows take it, and it comes out in their pee and poo.
Okay, great. So
Can
we'll
I
do
say
that.
pee and poo?
You can say whatever you want. Why don't you tell us about the store? Why don't you do that?
Okay. We want to tell you about our store over at redactedstore.com because we have all manner of goodies there for you, such as mugs and t-shirts and hats and hoodies, zip-ups, sweatshirts. This is a way for you to let other people know that you enjoy independent journalism by way of this show. We really appreciate it. And, we don't really mark these up very expensive at all. They basically are provided to you at cost. But we love when you guys take these things and show us them, pictures in the wild. It really means a lot that you are supporting our merchandise and spreading the word about our show. We appreciate it so much. So if you'd like to check out what we've got for you, please head on over to redactedstore.com. Once again, that's redactedstore.com.
On Monday, our Washington correspondent Dan Cohen joined us and shared his confrontation with former president of Colombia, Iván Duque. Things got a little heated. Here's a recap.
Señor Presidente.
Sí.
Un honor.
¿Cómo te va?
Muy bien.
¿Cómo te ha ido?
Muy bien, gracias. If I speak English, is that all right?
Yeah,
it's an honor to meet you.
The honor is mine. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Can we take a selfie?
Sure, man.
Okay. 1, 2. Can we say Ñaña Hernandez?
No Ñaña Hernandez.
Well, then shortly thereafter, Colombia's media and political establishment rushed to defend Duque. It was really interesting to see the love and outpouring to support Duque. Dan Cohen joins us to guide us now through why the media and the political establishment in Colombia came to defend this individual. Let us know, Dan, what's going on here?
Yeah, Clayton, the entire media establishment were tripping over each other in this mad rush to show their solidarity with Iván F. You Respect Me Duque and published a series of hit pieces on me. But key thing before we start, none of them could disprove a single accusation I made against Duque because they are all 100% certifiably true. And I'm going to show you how all of these outlets, like Iván Duque, are tied to paramilitary death squads and drug trafficking. So we're going to begin with Revista Semana. This magazine ran 3 hit pieces, including one called The Secret History of Dan Cohen, which consisted of a few of my tweets that are publicly visible, so not exactly a secret. They also ran a TikTok-style social media influencer video called The Cohen Deception. It said that I'm not a journalist and that I'm a fanatic of Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, and Vladimir Putin of Russia. But of course, they never addressed the substance of what I said here's what we have to understand about Semana Revista. Semana's director is named Vicky Davila. She's sort of like the Barbara Walters of Colombia, except she married into one of the biggest drug cartels in the country called the Génico clan. The Génico clan controls the Caribbean coast, and specifically the Cesar department, which is extremely important for drug trafficking into the Caribbean, to the United States, and to Europe. So here is Vicky Davila's tweet calling me a madman, an extremist, and a cowardly attacker. Now, in May, a figure named Salvatore Mancuso, who was the head of the single worst paramilitary death squad in Colombia's history, called the Autodefensas Unidas, commonly known as the AUC. This guy's a mass murderer. He testified in court that the Génico clan, to which Vicky Davila is married into, paid his paramilitary to kill. Now, I want people to understand that these weren't just assassinations of individuals. We're talking about the extermination of entire villages in which death squads would torture and murder all of the residents and then dress some of them in guerrilla fighter uniforms and place weapons on them in order to justify the killings, which the media would then play along with. So Vicky Davila worked at that time for an outlet called RCN, which played along with this scandal called false positives in a huge way. So RCN now reports that I insulted and attacked Iván Duque, but again, like Semana, couldn't challenge or disprove the substance of what I said. Here is the director of RCN, Jose Manuel Acevedo, saying, "Abuse can never replace arguments. What happened to former President Duque today cannot be celebrated. It's very low." Okay, so RCN is owned by a family called Ardila Lule. The Ardila Lule family owns not only RCN, but many massive businesses, including the largest beverage company in Colombia called Postobon. Salvatore Mancuso, the death squad leader, who is now in prison in the United States, he was extradited. He was basically sold out by his former friends. He testified in May that Postobon funded, Postobon being the beverage company that is owned, whose owners also own RCN, he testified that Postobon funded his death squad. He also testified that other Colombian and international corporations funded them too, including Coca-Cola, which we all know, Bavaria, a Colombian beer manufacturer, and Ecopetrol, which is Colombia's domestic petroleum corporation. So the family that owns RCN also funded paramilitary death squads. RCN also owns a channel called NTN24, which is run by a woman named Claudia Gurisati. Gurisati was the director of RCN years ago, and she was extremely close to another death squad leader named Carlos Castaño, who, acting in league with the Colombian government, ordered the murder of the most beloved journalist in Colombian history, Jaime Garzón. So today, Gurisati directs NTN24, which ran an article and this video.
Carajo! Asesino! Asesino!
La imagen del momento nos llega desde Washington, D.C. Lo que acaban de ver es el momento, parte del momento en el que el activista Dan Cohen confronta e insulta al expresidente de Colombia, Iván Duque, mientras transitaba por las calles de la capital de Estados Unidos junto a sus hijas menores.
Then we have Caracol Radio. Caracol means snail, and this outlet ran this piece highlighting the figures criticizing me, but like all of the others, once again, couldn't refute anything I said. Caracol Radio is owned by a Spanish conglomerate called Grupo Prisa, which owns a massive amount of media outlets in Latin America and Spain, including El País and Cadena Ser, Spain's top radio station. And Caracol Radio owns W Radio Colombia. The director of that channel, W Radio Colombia, Julio Sanchez Cristo, accused me of a cowardly attack against Duque. But Julio Sanchez Cristo was, according to the reporting of Colombian journalist Gonzalo Guillen, was mentioned in U.S. judicial files and records as a recipient of money from the Ochoa Vasquez family, which controls the Medellin drug cartel. So W Radio also published a piece saying my confrontation was rejected in Colombia, completely rejected. The comments prove otherwise. But what's especially hilarious about this one is somebody posted a poll underneath asking if people support me, the journalist, or Duque. And the result was more than 10,000 votes with more than 81% in my favor. So not exact. So they got it wrong. I mean, there are just too many of these to go over in a single segment. The mayor of Bogota, who's extremely liberal, denounced me. The former president of Colombia, Iván Duque's boss, Álvaro Uribe, he tweeted about it. But I mean, the main thing to understand here, Clayton, is that the professional media class is the propaganda wing of the Colombian narco state. It's just one huge animal. And what I've shown here today is just the tip of the iceberg.
It's unbelievable. But you have the people of Colombia answering these polls and showing their support for what you uncovered and what you talked about. But the media class, the political class, of course, all in bed together, publish all of these hit pieces on you. Was there anybody, maybe in the media or the political class, that actually came to your defense? Someone who's brave? Anybody like that?
In the political media class, I mean, I'll put it this way. I've received literally thousands of messages from average Colombians. The vast majority of them are messages of love and support. The Colombian artists El Matador and Alexro, who's in exile, they've done fantastic political cartoons about the confrontation with Duque. So it's been an overwhelmingly positive response. I mean, there are literally millions of Colombians who want to confront Duque like I did and would do a much better and more thorough job, but they can't because at the very least they'd be destroyed professionally or they might even be killed. So it's been an overwhelmingly positive response.
Can I just ask a question? I'm just curious, do the Colombian people, because I don't know, I'm just asking, but are the Colombian people aware at how corrupt their media is? Or, like, are the Colombian people aware where they get their money? So when they read these hit pieces, do they laugh at them? Do they know where this money comes from, or are they totally in the dark about it?
Yeah, I mean, in general, people know. It's no secret to them. These outlets have been totally discredited. It's only the kind of hardcore supporters of Duque and Uribe who benefit from that, or for some reason believe in their political project of the narco state, that really support that kind of thing. But overall, yeah, people understand that these outlets, if they weren't the propaganda wing of the narco state to begin with, they have been co-opted and turned into it. But I mean, I've received so those people have given me a lot of love. I mean, it's incredible. I read all of the messages, and obviously I can't respond to hardly any of them. I'd be sitting here all day writing to people. But I've also received many hate messages, comparatively few, in comparison to the amount of support I've gotten. But I've gotten hate messages and threats from Duque's supporters, which is totally predictable. But again, totally pales in comparison to the positive feedback. I also want to point out to the independent media outlets, I want to give them a shout out, and the journalists that have done positive coverage, and they risk their lives on a daily basis to expose the information that I presented about the Colombian narco state. I mean, none of the information that I've presented today is original. So a huge shout out to journalists like Gonzalo Guillen, Julian Martinez, Urias Velázquez, William Parra. There are many Colombian journalists and regular people who I'm indebted to for their work and support, so I can expose these things on Redacted to an English language audience. So we're going to keep exposing the crimes of the Colombian narco state and the United States' role, where these decisions are made here in Washington, that keeps Colombia as a permanent bloodbath. So everyone keep watching, keep an eye here on Redacted. Cuenta conmigo, Colombia.
Yeah, that just speaks to how important it is to support independent media. So thanks to the brave folks in Colombia who are doing this amazing reporting as well. And thanks to Dan for sharing this story and educating all of us about this. Thanks so much, Dan.
Thank you, Clayton.
All right, thanks, Dan. All right, for our next story, we are going to move over to Rumble because we likely won't be able to talk about what we're going to talk about here on YouTube, unfortunately, because we're going to have Dr. Pierre Kory on to dive deep into his brand new book, which just came out, called The War on Ivermectin. So we will talk about that with Dr. Pierre Kory on what that means and what the hell that he's gone through. We'll do that over on Rumble. So we are going to Rumble right now, rumble.com.
All right, but before we do that, we should warn people that it's Thursday. We don't do live shows over the weekend. And when you come back here next week, Clayton will be off. He's taking a 2-week vacation.
Yes.
You are in good hands with me. Please still show up. Even though you're only getting one half of the team. I have the boys with me, right? David and Philip. And
did they leave?
Yeah, we're here.
Okay,
I'll be here.
No,
they're still here.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe Philip will reveal this. Remember what we talked about, revealing his face, kind of like Wilson. But yeah, we won't have Clayton for the next 2 weeks. I just wanted to give you a little warning if you tune in and you're like, where the heck did he go?
No, our ratings will going to skyrocket.
What if we get the next 1 million subscribers when it's just me?
I know we just hit 2 million subscribers, but I'll come back and there'll be 3 million subscribers. I'm like,
let's do it, guys.
Get out of here, you.
Let's do amazing work. We're in it together. You're in good hands.
Pete Lopez just subscribed.
I am a professional.
What, David?
I said, well, let's do it. Pete Lopez is like, he's already. I'm there. He's like, I'm the one of 3 million.
Let's do it. And this
and it'll be
Cine Club.
It'll be a working vacation, but I'm just going to take some downtime to do some catch up on a lot of stuff. And so, Natalie was had 2 weeks off back a couple of months ago, and so it's my turn. We all need that mental break. We all need a little mental break. Otherwise, we can't do this show for very long. As my friend Tucker likes to say, you really need to have that downtime. Covering this type of news will just literally eat your brain apart because it's so taxing. So it really is. All right, so we're going to go over to Rumble right now for our next story and our interview with Dr. Pierre Kory. So come on over if you'd like to. It's totally up to you. Rumble.com/redacted is where we will be. The stream will continue unaffected.